Hello, everybody. This is Rick Manning, President of Americans for Limited Government today with our daily torch update from Americans for Limited Government. And folks, doesn't it seem like just everything's out of control? No matter what, the things that you kind of used to be able to take for granted have kind of, you can't, it's just everything seems to be going wrong. Or there's there's so many weird stories in the news that it almost overwhelms you. We think about from the balloons and the shooting down of various balloons, and quite honestly, the government's failure to really provide real briefings on that. Combined, then you look at the toxic spill in East Palestine, Ohio. You have a truck crash on I-10 near Tucson, causing evacuations there because there's toxic chemicals in the truck. You have we have Russian fighter planes probing going into our airspace in Alaska, having to be chased out by F-35s. We have a lot of different things that are happening that are just, and we have obviously Ukraine and whatever the heck's going on there. We have China being super aggressive and threatening most of the world. And threatening reprisals because we shot down their spy balloon. So at least one of them. It just seems like we're in a state of where, and then you go on top of that, and you know that the federal government has been engaged in censoring people. The federal government has been using social media platforms to shut down speech. They've been influencing elections. We've got the Hunter Biden laptop, which puts into question whether or not President Biden is completely compromised to the Chinese, the Ukrainians, and who God only knows who else. There's so many things, and truthfully, we only have the capacity to process so many things, and so it gets to be really, really difficult. It can seem overwhelming, and I think it's important that we take a deep breath. And we just relax for a moment or two. Yes, the spy balloons, we find out, today or yesterday, the Pentagon says at 8:39 p.m., there's a CBS report on Valentine's Day. I'm sure y'all were watching CBS News at 8:30, their website at 8:39 p.m. on Valentine's Day. I'll tell you a secret, I wasn't. But, they say it's a direct claim by U.S. intelligence officials that they tracked the original spy balloon after it lifted off from China. So they had an eye on it from the moment it lifted off, and it describes some characteristics of that balloon. For instance, it seemingly drifted in the air currents, but it just happened to go by Guam. It just happened to go by Japan, and it went by South Korea, and then it went up to Alaska. And when it was drifting down to Montana from Alaska, it was going at a leisurely pace, very slow, and was kind of hovering over Montana. And then when somebody looked up and they said, "Wait a second, we don't actually have a second moon. The Death Star isn't welcome here," and so they took a picture and they reported it. Suddenly, it made news. Apparently, that balloon dramatically picked up its pace and made quite good time across the country once it had been discovered. And so that's from the Pentagon to yesterday, U.S. intelligence sources. So this was a controlled aircraft. Let's just be clear, it was a controlled aircraft. But we get no information about the other 3 balloons that were shot down. We were told by a U.S. senator that they were balloons based on briefings, but we're not getting any information on that. And folks, there's a simple thing. As an American, I have to root for the Biden administration to get some of this stuff right. Okay. The world's too dangerous for the Biden administration to not be able to get anything right. And the fact of the matter is, I have been stunned. And if I were asked, if the Biden administration is watching this, guys, put the president on the air in a calming voice, and let people know that we're not being invaded by aliens. We're dealing with a number of crises, but we're always dealing with a number of crises. And he should admit that he made a mistake in not providing communication to the American public and transparency to the American public on the balloon and on the East Palestine explosions and toxic spills. He should come clean and just say, listen, we're not perfect. We make mistakes. But let me tell you what's up to date. And he needs to tell people the truth in that. And America, my observation of America is, if somebody comes and says, I messed up, we're going to do better, and gives you the straight scoop, America will give you a chance. Now, we may not want, from a political perspective, oh, Biden's a bum and all that, but a lot of America is feeling pretty unsettled. And it's not just inflation. It's not just worry about supply chain. It's not just in things that aren't on the shelves or not being able to depend on things being on the shelves. It's not the fact that eggs are 70% more expensive today than they were a year ago. It's a combination. It's like there's a series of events that are all straws being put on the camel's back. And suddenly you hit a point where people say everything's out of control. And they feel uncomfortable. They feel as if everything's out of control. And that is a dangerous place to be. And it's Joe Biden's job as president to try to assure people that things aren't out of control. He needs to say, listen, he needs to tell the truth, but he needs to say, we've been on top of the East Palestine toxic spill. Here's what's happening. Here's what we're doing to mitigate against it, and give a comprehensive view of what's happening and what they're doing to a national audience. He needs to talk about the balloons to a national audience, because ultimately that's his job. The president is supposed to, in times of crisis or unease, to lead forward, not be political, not sit there and do like his spokesperson did yesterday, go, well, we're doing so much better because Trump didn't even see the balloons. Well, give me a break. You guys didn't even tell the Trump administration that there were balloons. If the report out of DOD is true, that which unnamed source DOD, there are balloons flying around when Trump was president. Nobody in the Trump administration found that out. Department of Defense didn't tell anybody in the White House. If you don't tell anybody in the White House, then you're denying the elected representative people the right to do their job. And you're saying, oh, I'm going to do your job. You don't have to. Trump should have been briefed on it. His director of national intelligence should have been briefed on it. They weren't. That's a department. So my inclination is, since those things are kind of de rigueur, they just happen. My inclination is there were no balloons in the Trump administration, and the illustration that talking about there being balloons in the Trump administration was merely a political dodge by Obama appointees in the Department of Defense. That's the most likely scenario by far. So, but Joe Biden needs to come clean. He needs to let people know, that things are under control. And because people are not going to feel at ease under unless it's just so unusual for a president not to do that in this circumstance. But, he had his State of the Union address, and I guess that's his one speech a year, or maybe he's out of, I don't know. But it's just really odd that they haven't. So, but what can Congress do? What can we do? The first thing is, we have to take a deep breath. Okay. That's the first thing. The end of the world, for the first time in a long time, people are thinking about nuclear annihilation. There's two generations at least that didn't have to crawl under their little desk and for earthquake drills in California and nuclear drills. But I did. I wouldn't fit under the desk now, but back then it fit quite fine under the desk. And we drilled on that. So it was in our conscious that we're conscious of the possibility that something really bad could happen. you know, we were conscious that prices could go up well above what the wages went up, because it happened in our when we were teenagers, when we were young adults, even when we were middle-aged adults. We experienced it. We know what inflation is. People, so for people who are uneasy, a lot of times it's because they haven't experienced what's going on before, and it seems like the world's off kilter. And truthfully, the world is off kilter. The supply chain problems are real, and in many respects, they're manufactured. Manufactured by China's decision to not export goods, manufactured by problems where you don't have your ships in the right place, and so shipping stuff across the ocean becomes harder because you don't have the quantity of the ships aren't distributed at the ports the way they're needed to be to meet the demand. There's lots of reasons why we could have supply chain disruption, notwithstanding some problems, environmental problems or feed problems that cause there to be fewer eggs produced, as some have alleged is the case. From a governmental perspective, what Republicans need to do, what the House majority needs to do, is they need to get there in a consolidated way, get and take the unease about and the lies about Medicare and Social Security being cut in this circumstance with the debt ceiling. They need to pass a debt ceiling increase with defined cuts that are realistic and understandable to the public. They need to pass it through the House. They need to have full debate in the House. They need to pass it through the House, send it to the Senate, and take away the argument that the Republicans don't want to pass the debt ceiling and are going to mess up the full faith in government of the United States and ruin our credit rating. Well, you and I know that's not going to occur in terms of credit rating being ruined. Whether or not debt ceiling is passed or not, debt ceiling increase is passed or not, the fact of the matter is most voters are susceptible to that kind of rhetoric, and that's why that kind of rhetoric gets played out. So Kevin McCarthy needs to take that issue and say we're cutting the budget, have it definable, have it be something everybody can understand, and that's why I'm arguing that if you're going to do that, do a 1% cut on all the so-called discretionary spending. That's the $1.7 trillion. Do a 1% cut on that. That's the equivalent of about $170 billion. So it's a lot of money, but but everybody out there, every person who's listening knows that if your push came to shove and you were told you have to cut 1% out of your budget, you'd be able to find 1% to cut out of your budget. And so adopting the penny plan and cutting 1%, and let the Democrats complain about it. Let them cry about it. That would be wise. So that would be one thing, by taking some of the uncertainty off the table relating to debt ceiling. Taking that uncertainty away will cause people to feel more at ease, as if everything's not falling apart. What else do you need to do? The Congress needs to pass legislation that holds public employees accountable who didn't show up to work during the COVID crisis. Why? Because part of fixing this problem it's not going to all fix at once. We have to build a process to be able to fix things like draining the swamp. So it isn't just a slogan, it's actually something that can get done. And by doing little steps that lead up to that provide you with the means, the arguments, and the right ideas on how to restrain the administrative state, how to cut government, and in a way that makes it so people sit there and they embrace it, overwhelmingly embrace it. we have to create. You have to create the groundwork for that. Lay the groundwork for that, and that's one of the ways you do it. Is you invest. You basically, force the administration to tell the American people what the regularity that civil servants worked from March of 2020 to January of 2023, because people understand. If you say only as an HHS for the first year, only 25% of the people didn't even log into their computers, people realize, that's a problem. We're paying those people. Pretty straightforward. Deal with it. But you have to set up the things like that allow you to do the next steps to drain the swamp. What else should they do? Well, they should force the Biden administration to, if they don't make a speech, they should force the Biden administration to be in front of a Senate committee, a House committee more likely, and have a discussion where they have to answer questions about what exactly happened. And the reason you want to do that, and the politicians need to resist the urge to spend 5 minutes yelling at the person giving testimony and not allowing the person to give testimony to provide any light. And you see, the interesting part is the people, if I'm testifying and I don't want to talk, the last thing I want is to have somebody ask me a short question and then ask me to elaborate. What I want that person to think, oh, I'm going to be a YouTube hero, and I'm going to tell that person off. I'm going to make great YouTube, and it's going to get lots of hits. But that person, when they do that, they take up all their time, and I don't have to answer a question. It's the ideal scenario if you're on the hot seat. So force the people who are on the hot seat to answer the questions and expand upon them. And that is how you get information, and that's how you find out what's really going on. Congress should do that. They can do that on a number of issues. On the supply chain issue, they can do it. They can do it in terms of the inflation issue. They can do it in terms of virtually every issue that we're dealing with. The deep state and the subversion of our judiciary system, the attempt by Democrats to keep the COVID emergency alive. Joe Biden says he needs 2 more months before he can end the COVID emergency. Well, for what? For what purpose? You've been in office for 2 years. Tell us what you would do to help end the COVID emergency in a way that would cause the least amount of pain while being true to our actual principles. That's what Congress can do that. Bottom line is, there's a lot of stuff happening in the world. I would argue that a lot of times the reason there's a lot of stuff happening in the world is because there's always a lot of stuff happening in the world. And we just don't necessarily know it. But we know it now. We know some of the problems. We're being asked to confront them. And first and foremost, we don't trust our leaders, particularly our intelligence agencies and our president, to give us a straight story and to lead us. We have a Secretary of Transportation, Buttigieg, who 10 days after the East Palestine train derailment and release of toxic chemicals into the air, 10 days later was giving a press conference and failed to even talk about it. Failed to even acknowledge it. Seems like a transportation secretary would be all over that one. Pete Buttigieg isn't all over anything. He is almost as if he didn't even know it existed, that it occurred. So we need to have people who are trustworthy, allowing people to say, okay, I may not like Joe Biden, but at least I think things just spin out of control and we're going to blunder into nuclear war. We're going to blunder into a toxic spill that destroys one of the great waterways in the United States, in the Ohio River and its subsidiaries. those are the kind of things that you look at and you say, this is kind of basic performance as president. It's not like they were asking President Biden to go above and beyond. Just do the basic stuff, the blocking and tackling. But we feel uneasy because Joe Biden won't talk about stuff. He won't get on the air and take responsibility for anything that happens. And in fact, he'll duck and dive and will point fingers at everybody but him. And that doesn't make you feel very good about what's going on. And so this crisis in confidence, this crisis of people feeling unmoored from, that's a real problem. And the president of the United States has a responsibility to fix it. And it's an easy fix to do. I'm going to take some questions because, sorry, me just talking. Here's a long one. Virginia Cummings. American working taxpaying citizens of this nation are not represented by the very government they are responsible to pay for. American citizens have taxation with representation. It's time for American working taxpayer citizens of this nation to revolt against a government that does not represent them nor their families. It's time to impeach Joe Biden. It's time to impeach Kamala Harris for failure to hold their oath of office, the people of the Republic of the United States. I think listen, I can't disagree that impeachment should be on the table. This administration has been horrific. We started by focusing on Alejandro Mayorkas because he's responsible for two of the big points of the spear. One, he's responsible for a lot of the domestic spying scandal of going after censoring people like me and you on Facebook or elsewhere. Mayorkas has that under his department, and he is, and they are aggressively trying to get social media companies to censor people. He also is responsible for the open border. And so given the fact he's responsible for spying on the rest of us and letting a bunch of people across the border who are illegal, in spite of the national security concerns, in spite of legitimate concerns about their ability to make a living here and the like, we have an administration that's bent. It's going to put as many illegal aliens through our doors as they can, as long as they have power. Mayorkas is the one that holds the power. Congress needs to impeach him. So I'm not far from where you are, Virginia. Let's see here. Oh yeah. Zuckbucks are Mark Zuckerberg from Facebook, Meta, put a program together where they donated a bunch of money to a 501c3 corporation, nonprofit corporation, that then went and basically gave massive grants to various registrar offices of the supervisors of elections in various places around the country. They did it in key places that, Maricopa County, Green Bay County, places where when they're just a little bit can tip the process. And so they went off, and in Green Bay County in Wisconsin, they were found, somebody who was not a member of the staff, the voter registrar staff in Green Bay, Wisconsin, was found in the back rooms because they were the consultant from the Zuckerberg donation, and they were busily, having illegal access to ballots and the like, as an advocate. That's a huge problem. And so Zuckbucks being back means that Mark Zuckerberg is trying to come up with a different way of essentially controlling the vote counting process. And so what he's trying to do is essentially create an ability for there to be unaccountable vote counting. And anytime you have somebody who's not supposed to have access to ballots, with direct access to ballots, as I described in Green Bay, Wisconsin, that invalidates, it taints the entire balloting process. So that's what Zuckbucks tries to do. It was made illegal a lot of places, but it keeps popping up in different locales. So stay tuned on that. Let's see, broken public servants. Yeah, I think that is absolutely true. It's hard to imagine. I mean, think about it. If I were to tell you, I had told you 3 months ago that that our country is the country that has the largest human trafficking problem of any country in the world, you would say, no, you don't. But yes, we do. Yes, we do. If I were to tell you that the FBI 3 months ago, maybe 6 months ago, a year ago, but if I told you not that distant past, that the FBI was actively engaged in spying operations against political opponents of their own chosen presidential candidates, I would have said I was crazy. Wouldn't have believed it. I wouldn't believe how brazen they were, but they were. So one of the things that causes people to sit there and say, I feel better about things, I don't feel they're so loose, is to have, in this case, Republicans really hold those responsible and hold them accountable who have violated the public trust, pass legislation that corrects the violations of the public trust, but hold the people responsible who basically created an environment where we can't trust our intelligence agencies because they blew their trustworthiness. Those people need to be prosecuted. And I don't have any great expectation they'll be convicted in DC, but they need to be prosecuted. So there's lots of things like that can be done. And truthfully, most of the things that can be done at the state level, with state attorney generals filing lawsuits against out of control Department of Justice actions, with with local voters going and making certain that only people who are eligible to vote actually vote by being at the polling place and the counting, and just have the list and just demand that it be only people who are eligible, only those people's votes count. Pretty straightforward. So there's lots of things that can be done that need to be done. But most of all, we just have to remember that it's going to be okay. God's in control, and God in control is better than any one of us being in control by magnitudes of 1,000. So when I start feeling kind of unsettled, I just think and remember that God's in control. God of the universe who created everything is in control. The God who opened the Red Sea is in control. And when I know that, it allows me to rest and not feel as though that the entire world is on fire. With that, I'm going to let you go. Thank you very much for jumping in today. We'll have something else tomorrow. I'm hoping to do something a little more fun. And we're going to have in our feed for tomorrow, I think I'm going to include an interview with Tony Bronco, our cartoonist, and Devin Nunes, the head of Truth Social. Devin interviewed Tony yesterday, and I think you'd learn a lot and you would enjoy seeing that interview. So I'm planning on pulling that up and pushing it out to you guys so you can see it, because Tony is a funny guy, but it's good to see a politician like Devin, who's pretty straightforward, cutting up a little bit with Tony. And it's just refreshing to see normal people do live back here and have same kind of jokes. So with that, I'm going to bid you a sweet adieu. Thank you for tuning in and hope to see you tomorrow.